Hello and welcome to a special 2 hours. So Tuesday, Theresa May faces one of the most critical parliamentary votes in recent times. A heavy defeat is on the horizon after more than 100 Conservative MPs have already spoken out against her Brexit deal. If she loses the vote, who knows what will happen next? A general election, a second referendum, a managed no deal, more bartering with Brussels? Well, I can't promise all the answers, but we will try our very best to get to the bottom of it in the next 2 hours. The former Work and Pension Secretary, Esther McVey, will be here for her first TV interview since resigning from the Cabinet. The former Brexit Secretary, Dominic Raab, tells me the controversial Irish backstop could have been avoided. We'll also be speaking to 3 of the most influential backbenchers in the House of Commons, plus the DUP's leader in Westminster, and more. Whew. Our aim today is to provide some much-needed Brexit clarity in these uncertain times. So let's crack on. Well, this week, the government lost 3 votes in the House of Commons within the space of 2 hours and won the dubious honour of becoming the first government in history to be found in contempt of Parliament. Labour are, of course, as you'd expect, piling on the pressure, with the shadow Brexit Secretary telling me on this show last week that a confidence motion in the government would be inevitable if the Brexit vote is lost. Well, joining us now is one of Jeremy Corbyn's most trusted allies and a key member of his inner circle, the Shadow Cabinet Minister, John Trickett. Thank you very much for being with us.
Hello.
Well, in these very unpredictable times, we're trying to give our viewers a bit of a sense about what might unfold next week.
Sure.
So, if Theresa May does lose this vote, as we expect her to, will Labour be calling a confidence motion?
Let's see what happens. I mean, look, the present focus is on making sure we defeat this really bodged deal which has been presented to the House of Commons. We don't know, though the media is saying we are going to win the vote, whether we'll win or not. We'll then see what our tactics need to be following that. And there's a number of possible scenarios, and I don't think it's possible to guess in advance exactly what's going to happen.
Last week on the show, though, the Shadow Brexit Secretary, Keir Starmer, told me it was inevitable that Labour would call a confidence motion if she lost the vote. So what's changed?
Nothing has changed. We simply don't know what is going to happen on Tuesday night. And remember, it's quite possible, according to, again, to the media, and who knows, that the whole vote may be put off and that Mrs May goes back to Europe. Look, the big question, which is facing the country, is how, in a democratic society, do we retain consent of the people? I think the Brexit vote shows that a significant body of people do not consent to the direction in which the country is being going. And I represent, if you like, Brexit Central. My seat is one of the strongest Brexit areas. Those people believe that their voice would be listened to and that we would have a proper Brexit, which would put jobs first. That is not what we've got. We've got a deal which is bodged, and Mrs May said there's no other alternative. Let's see what happens on Tuesday night. We need to defeat this, and we also, by the way, need to make sure that there's no cliff edge falling out of Brexit inadvertently with the disaster which would then follow.
You're talking there about some pretty big themes, about people feeling not listened to, disconnected.
Yeah.
So what I don't understand, then, is calling a confidence motion would be Labour's big chance of getting into power. Why would you possibly give that up?
We're not ruling anything out at the present time. I think we need to see what happens on the night. Nobody really knows. And I've sat with government ministers. You're speaking to some this morning, probably.
Nobody knows, but we've got a pretty clear idea, haven't we? It's going to be difficult for her to win, isn't it?
If you're going on a journey, you need to take one step at a time. And the truth is, we are facing a big moment in our country's history. Let's be honest about it. The first thing is to persuade the country this is the wrong deal, to persuade the House of Commons. When that has happened, there will be a series of votes, probably, one of which is to say that we should rule out, that the House of Commons rules out a deal which simply leaves us falling off the edge. That is quite an important debate as well. What subsequently happens and exactly how it's choreographed, we need to see. Now, clearly we have a view as to what ought to happen, but we are not the government, we are not the largest party, and Mrs May still holds most of the cards in relation to what happens after the vote, though I think time is really running out for her. And if you can tell me whether she will still be the Prime Minister on Tuesday evening, then perhaps I can tell you what we do what exactly we will do next. So there's a number of scenarios.
I wish I could tell you.
Well,
it's into my crystal ball. Sadly, I'm not an MP. I'm not a member of the shadow cabinet. You've got a lot more influence than me.
Well, it may be that she doesn't quite know either, by the way. I think things have run out of control. And look, the whole way in which she's negotiated this has been an absolute disaster from the start. Why would you begin right at the start to say that all these millions of people who are European citizens who've lived here for many, many years, paid their tax, contributed to our economy, should now become a point of negotiation? I mean, that would cause offence from day one.
To be fair, she said right from the beginning, hasn't she, that she wants to guarantee the rights of people already here?
I don't believe she has from the very beginning, and it caused great offence. If you're the Prime Minister or President of another country and you've got maybe tens of thousands of citizens working in Britain, you want to know from day one that those jobs and those people are going to be secure here. So, and I think the language has been used by some Tories about putting up the white flag and capitulation. It implies that Europe is somehow our enemies, rather than our allies, friends or long-term neighbours.
So you described the negotiation as a disaster there, and I have to say it has been quite an extraordinary week for the government. We've got over 100 Conservative MPs saying that they can't support the Prime Minister's deal. They've become the first government in history to be found in contempt of Parliament. So my question to you is, why hasn't Labour had a big lead in the polls? We can have a look at the latest poll, for example. I know this is just one poll, but an Ipsos Mori poll on Friday, effectively saying that you're deadlocked. If the government is in such disarray, then why aren't you so far ahead?
Well, look, I think we've all learnt that the polls only reveal so much. The polls proved very, very badly wrong in the past. In the election, we were at 26 points, I think, when the election was called only last year. That was another disastrous decision by the government, by the way. We finished at over 40 points.
Well, I'm not sure. Put on another 20 points this time, then you'd be doing better than any parties in the 1930s.
Look, I think the country is genuinely watching what's happening. I think, to some extent, confused and worried, anxious about the future. Look, and look at the kind of news which is happening all around us, you know, the universal credit, the explosion of wealth for the richest and other people living in very difficult conditions. The United Nations saying there are 15 million of our fellow citizens living in poverty, 250,000 children in Yorkshire in poverty. I mean, a government should be able to do several things at once, multitask, but this government can't even single task.
Now, I'm keen to talk to you about Labour's positions. You're talking about people feeling uncertain or concerned. So let's try and find out what Labour's position is. If there is election, you'll have to tell us then. Does Labour support a second referendum? Is that something you would like to see?
What we said, and I think you know this, the conference, our Labour Party conference, decided that a second referendum should be one of the options which are available to us. But again, if anybody can tell me exactly how this is going to emerge over time, then I think we can give you a clear and concrete answer.
You have a chance to shape what happens, though, haven't you?
Of course we can.
It's not just about following events. This is really serious stuff.
Of course,
you've got a chance to shape.
You're trying to pull me into a what-if question.
I'm asking what Labour's policy is.
No, it's a what if the vote happens on Tuesday night and we lose the vote. If the Tories lose the vote, what would then happen subsequently? And I don't think we can say that a referendum is the only possible alternative. And let me explain why. Because, as you know, we said that an election is probably our preferred choice. And the reason why we said that is because if a referendum were to take place in the present Parliament, who's to say that we will get out the gridlock which the Parliament is in? And the election allows us to refresh the mandate, have a conversation with the wider population and come back to Parliament, probably with some new MPs and different point of view, and take the argument forward at that stage. So our preferred option, very, very strongly, is that we refresh the Parliament, though we are ready to form a minority government, should that be necessary, and it could happen on Wednesday morning, and to begin to reset the negotiation and take the country forward in a much better direction. I
just want to talk a little bit more about this second referendum question, because, as you said, you support a seat that voted very happily for Brexit in West Yorkshire. What do you think the reaction would be by constituents in places like where you represent if there was another vote?
Well, I think if people feel that a privileged political elite has decided by subterfuge to find a way of reversing the previous referendum, that would cause us some difficulty, and rightly so, because I started this discussion with you describing this sense in the country of what on earth's happening, this withdrawal of consent. So I think we need to show to the country that we've been through the various different options and that at some point, if a referendum becomes absolutely necessary, it's at that point that it takes place. And bear in mind this, it can take months, 6 or 7 months, to organise a referendum because there's no law which allows us to do it. So we have to pass a law, we have to decide what the question is, we have to renew the people on the voting lists, and then there has to be a period of time for the referendum. So we think the earliest it can take place is probably May or June. We'll have gone past the March deadline which Mrs May has imposed on the country. So there are some issues about a referendum which need to be addressed as well. But look, in the meantime, every day which passes is another day nearer to potential disaster. And we say we need to reset the negotiations straight away on a new basis and come forward with a different way of running our country and its relationship with Europe.
Do you think that some MPs from all parties, from Labour, from the Conservatives, in southern seats, particularly London, do you think they really understand the sense of betrayal that some voters would feel if there was another referendum?
I can't speak for other MPs, but what I know is it's visceral, it's deep in people's soul that this country needs to change direction in the constituency I represent, and I think across the north generally. And rightly so, because look what's happening to the communities which were the source of Britain's wealth in the Industrial Revolution over the centuries after that. And now that these areas have been deindustrialised, the jobs which are coming are temporary, often part-time, poorly paid, insecure. Our young people don't have a future unless they move out of the area. And I think all of that weighs heavily on people's minds when they're thinking of the future. I think Brexit was a vote to say we do not like the direction of the country. And so Labour's response has been a big response. We do need to change direction substantially and fundamentally and head in a new direction to rebuild all those communities.
With all that in mind,
yeah.
Do you want to see us leave the EU now?
Our line has been that...
I'm asking, what do you think? What's your position, John Trickett?
My view is clear, and my history, everybody knows, is I was against going into the coal market all those years ago as a young man. Over the years, though, the economy has become very tied up with Europe, and therefore I think it's not easy for us to disentangle. So my position, and our position, by the way, has been that we need to stay, but we need to do fundamental and radical reform because status quo, things as they are now...
So you want us to stay now, even after having the referendum?
No, we've decided that we are leaving because we've listened to the people's vote, which was an instruction from the people, a kind of contract between us and the people to accept the decision.
So you think that we should leave?
You were asking what our position was at the time of the
Oh, no, now,
referendum.
I mean your position now.
Well, our position is quite clear. We accept the results of the referendum and we think that there is a way through this. And by the way, we think there's a way of not dividing the country. At the moment, we have a government which is trying to divide the country on the lines of how they voted in the referendum. I think there's a way of bringing the country back together again. This government has been appalling in the way it's divided people one against the other, and that must stop.
OK, John Trickett, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, after the break, we'll be talking to the former Work and Pension Secretary, S. McVeigh, in her first broadcast interview since quitting the government over the Prime Minister's Brexit deal.
On a grey plane, on a grey day, it wasn't the most festive arrival in Cyprus. But with only 3 hours on the ground, William and Kate were at RAF Akrotiri with a Christmas message of support.
I recognise a few of the faces around here.
The Duke and Duchess had brought with them some very important deliveries, presents from children and family back home for people like Sarah, who won't make it back for Christmas.
It's emotional. I think it's easier for us out here because we all just muck in together, whereas for the families at home, there's that seat around the dinner table on Christmas Day where you're normally sat.
They're doing a tough job here. The Typhoon and Tornado squadrons have been flying missions into Syria and Iraq as part of the UK's campaign against ISIS.
As we approach Christmas, Catherine and I feel strongly that praise for your work and recognition of your sacrifices is exactly what is due to you all. From my time in uniform, we both know a bit of what it feels like to balance your work commitments with your family life. You all put duty first.
Of course, Christmas can bring out the best and worst in any family, whoever you are. But this was a day to celebrate the importance of at least being together, especially for those who spent so much time apart.
This year I was away for 7 months on operations just before moving here. So, you know, like, it's nice just to be back together again.
What's your name?
Erin.
Hi, Erin. Nice to see you.
A few final Christmas presents and time to head for their plane. Thinking of the military personnel who won't be going home this year and wishing we would concentrate on that as well. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News, at RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus.
Welcome back. Well, just over 3 weeks ago, Esther McVey quit her job in the Cabinet over Theresa May's Brexit plan. In her resignation letter, she said the deal does not honour the result of the referendum and fails to secure the right outcome for the future of our country. And she joins us now for her first TV interview since leaving government. Esther, welcome.
Morning.
It feels as if we've heard everybody else's accounts of what happened in that crucial Cabinet meeting where Theresa May's Brexit plan was signed off, apart from yours. So what did happen?
Well, obviously, I'm not going to breach confidences of what happens in Cabinet. I never have, and I won't start now. But I can put some of the record straight that has already been in the paper. Fundamentally, at the end, after we'd all been discussing for 5 hours about the Brexit deal, there were voices of dissent, people saying different things. So I asked on the most crucial issue of a generation, could we have a vote of the Cabinet to see exactly where the various secretaries of state where the Cabinet ministers were on the issue. It's happened before under previous administrations, so you could have a vote, but obviously it's down to the Prime Minister. It is her Cabinet. She can choose to elect what she does. But as I said, there were various voices of dissent, and I felt we needed to focus the mind of people who were taking a decision that would last longer than us being in Cabinet, longer than us being in Parliament, but was about the future of the United Kingdom.
So you didn't cry then?
No.
Why do you think people are so obsessed with whether female politicians cried?
I wonder whether it was obviously briefed to the papers afterwards, and obviously, maybe they thought that would see me in a negative light, but people who know me know that I'm forthright, I am feisty, I am straight-talking, and quite rightly, I'm passionate about this issue. But all we needed to know was, what do people think? And in all honesty, I think it says there was a meltdown in the Cabinet. The meltdown was from the others not wanting to put their name next to a vote. It certainly wasn't from me asking for one.
Yeah, I am keen to kind of talk about this because it does feel as if some of the briefings were pretty unusual, shall we say, around you. According to reports in the press, your behaviour was described as hysterical and aggressive. As you say, people said you had a meltdown. In October, an unnamed Treasury source said of you, the only thing she knows how to do well is a blow-dry. Is it sexist, do you think?
Well, look, different people use the media in different ways to portray a story and to get an issue out there. There was 2 things that I wanted to deliver, and that was A, Brexit, that the UK voted for, but unfortunately in the Cabinet, the majority of people and those in the key posts all voted Remain, from the Prime Minister to the Chancellor to the Deputy Prime Minister to the Home Secretary to the Foreign Secretary. So obviously, there's obviously an issue there. And the other thing that I wanted to do was get more money for universal credit, because, yes, it does a heck of a lot of good, but for the most vulnerable, it wasn't supporting. So I succeeded in getting it in the budget, £4.5 billion extra. And again, at the time, everybody didn't want that to happen either. So that could be why you've had briefings, because it was on 2 issues, more money for universal credit, and 2, to deliver the Brexit vote that the people of the UK put forward. OK,
should we deal with universal credit? Because it feels as if there's been a lot written about it. People's feelings run very, very strongly about universal credit. And I know that was something that, of course, you were responsible for up to your resignation. Now, according to the Trussell Trust, they say on average 12 months after universal credit is rolled out, food banks see a 52% increase in demand. 70% of recipients find themselves in debt while waiting for their payments, and only 8% say that payment covers their cost of living. I mean, is that a record you're proud of?
Well, the Trussell Trust there, you've got to look at where the source is coming from, who have been interviewed to give those comments, and those are from people coming into the Trussell Trust. So those results weren't authenticated. They weren't sort of verified as such.
But it's no secret that people were in hardship when they had to wait for those payments to come through.
What I will say is, and that's what I spent 8 months doing, saying, OK, how do we sort out one sort of extreme of people saying it isn't working at all to other people who are saying it's the best thing that ever happened. So for 85% of people or more, they are saying it's helping us into work. We're working more than ever before, which we've seen. 1,000 people every day, each and every day since 2010, are in work. So it's working there. But what I looked at is, but for the people it's not working for, so those are the people who will find themselves going into the Trussell Trust. Those are people who will find themselves going to support groups and budget groups, Christians Against Poverty, CAB, various other institutions. So I met with all them and said, what can we do? Hence, I fought for the extra £4.5 billion in the budget. Hence, I fought for £1.5 billion to make sure that the severe disability premium was there for 500,000 extra people. So I said, how do we make it work? What money needs to come forward? But not just money, it was about how it was delivered to. So people would say, how can we make sure that the payment period and the assessment period doesn't knock out our payment? How do we make sure that we get money straight away, which you can get within advance? And going forward, how do we make sure it's not always paid monthly? It could be paid weekly, fortnightly, 3-weekly, 4-weekly. So a lot of that I've already put in place. Some of it will be coming through after the vote in the House, and then further monies are coming forward next year, and that's on delivery. So I said we've got to have outreach work, we've got to have a flexible fund, we've got to look at those people who you will be hearing for, which it doesn't work for at the moment. So a good government, a proper government, and how this system was set up was to be about, it's about being agile, it's about being able to quickly respond to people's needs. And that's what we needed to do, and that's what we are doing and should continue to do as a compassionate Conservative government. And again, I said, how can you give £39 billion to the EU, and for what for? And yet I'm fighting desperately for few billion for the most vulnerable people in the UK. That cannot be right.
Now that you're not in government anymore and you don't have to defend universal credit, are you sorry for any of the hardships that some people faced?
What I will say, and I think you've got to look at it in its entirety, the legacy system it replaced wasn't working. So people who could have got out of poverty and into work, it wasn't working for them. They couldn't work more than 16 hours, 24 hours, 30 hours. So they were trapped in poverty. This, for the first time ever, makes work pays. It allows people to come forward and come out of poverty. So again, thousands, 3.5 million more people we've helped.
Okay.
But those who it wasn't working for, we knew we've got to make it do better. And equally, under Labour, the benefits bill shot up by 60%. They'd made the benefit system unaffordable and unsustainable going forward. I've always said we took difficult decisions in 2010 and 2015 to make it affordable. But you know what? As we come out of austerity, as we want to make this work, that's what we've got to do. We've now got to look at the freeze on benefits. Do we still need that? Maybe not. Remove that, and mixed-age couples in the new year, how do we support them?
OK. Let's look forward to next week now, because this vote on Tuesday, if it happens, is going to be absolutely crucial. A lot of MPs are saying that they can't support the Prime Minister's deal. If it gets voted down, as we expect it will, what do you think needs to happen then?
The Prime Minister immediately has to go to the EU and get a better deal. That's what she must do. And there are two key things. People talk about the 585-page document. There are two key things in there. One is the backstop, We don't need the backstop. We shouldn't have the backstop. The EU says it doesn't want it. We don't want it. So why is it there? Remove it.
But at the same time, I mean, you can say that, you know, no one wants to be in a traffic jam, so why should there be a traffic jam? The reason that there's a backstop is to avoid that border in Ireland.
I don't think that's the same thing. A traffic jam is there. No, we are creating the backstop. It isn't there. Therefore, nobody wants it. Remove it. And the other bit is the £39 billion. Why, oh, why are we handing over £39 billion and what for? That £39 billion shouldn't be for the withdrawal agreement moving out. That £39 billion has to be used for the future agreement. That has to be for our future trade agreement with them. And if that isn't happening, we cannot agree to this withdrawal.
If Theresa May cannot get what you want her to, what should she do? Should she move to a second referendum? Should she call an election? Or do you think she should then move to a managed no deal?
Well, what she said, and I've agreed with her since she started, we've got to come out the customs union. We've got to come out the single market.
So Norway's not an option for you,
No, we've got to have control of our laws, of our borders, of our money, of our sovereignty, of movement of people. And therefore, she has got to say, as she's always said, no deal is better than a bad deal. That's what we said, that's what we agreed in. Article 50 is there, and we are coming out of the EU. As she replied to me in a Prime Minister's questions, we are coming out on the 29th of March.
So therefore, no deal is better than the deal on the table, is what you're saying?
We've always said, if we cannot come to an agreement, then we will be coming out without one. So we've always said no deal was better than a bad deal. Not Remain. Remain was never there, and the people voted for out. So what she's got to say, because the EU doesn't want no deal, we don't want no deal. So between us, of course, we can get a better deal for the UK. Backstop goes. The £39 billion is for our future agreement, not to talk about an agreement. Who'd paid £39 billion to talk about an agreement? £39 billion is for that agreement.
At the same time, though, there's been some pretty concerning warnings about the impact of no deal. And I know there's a lot of scepticism about some of the forecasts, but it does feel as if there is perhaps a unanimous recognition that there will be an economic hit if there is no deal. Is that a price worth paying?
We've heard Project Fear 1 when we heard all of these. And coming back to my department, we got told if we even voted for the referendum, 500,000 more people would be unemployed. That did not happen. We've still got record rates of employment. In fact, the UK has created, since 2010, more jobs than France, Spain, Ireland, Austria, Sweden, the Netherlands and Norway put together. So I've heard the Project Fear stories, and this is yet more. Of course we can succeed, and of course we want to make sure that it is a managed process. So if there is no deal, we would have, as we've got now, an implementation period by which we would work together. We could even say, here's half the money up front, and then half the money at the end.
But if there's no deal, there isn't an implementation period.
No, but why not? Of course you could arrange to have one, because you pay for the implementation period, about £10 billion. That is not true. If you've got an implementation for a deal, you would negotiate to have an implementation for no deal, because we pay for that implementation period. And of course, if the EU don't want no deal, we don't want no deal. What we both want is to be good neighbours, good allies, good friends. We are in the same geography, so let's get that free trade agreement. I believe it is there to get.
The other people who don't want a no deal is UK MPs. Are you not concerned that because there is such a majority in the House against a no deal scenario, that by voting down the Prime Minister's deal, all you're doing is making a second referendum more likely and no Brexit at all?
Look, MPs come to Parliament because the people elected them. Now, in Parliament, by a vast majority, we said the people should have a say. We gave the referendum to the people to have a say. They told us it was either in or out, and they said out. Now, that's what the people said. Unfortunately, in the House, there's too many MPs who voted Remain, so they are going against the people. So when you talk about trust in Parliament, trust in government, that's what it's about. They've said, you asked us, we've given you our decision, now go and do that. Don't try and confuse us. And in fact, this is something that I heard at the weekend when I was meeting with my constituents. They said, you know what, Est, when people can't convince people They try and confuse people, and that's what we feel politicians are doing to us now. We don't want you to confuse us. We know we can get a better deal. What are we paying for? Nobody wants this backstop. Give us what we asked for, which is Brexit, which is to come out of the EU.
You said just then that too many MPs backed Remain. You were talking earlier about the number of Remain supporters in the cabinet. Do you think the next leader of the Conservative Party needs to be a Brexiteer?
I think that, first of all, we've got to take one step at a time. And I'm led to believe today that the Prime Minister's going to go and have another go at negotiating with the EU, which she wasn't prepared to do, which I asked her to do in Cabinet. She wasn't prepared to. But if she goes out and gets this deal that we want on those two key points, well, then she will remain as our Prime Minister because she will have done the deal that she was asked to do. And if she doesn't, then it is going to be very difficult for her. But fundamentally, what she needs to understand...
Does she need to resign if she can't get the deal that you want?
It's not what I want, it's what the public wants, what we voted for. In and out it was on that ballot sheet, and the country voted out.
Well, it's difficult to know exactly what everybody voted for, isn't it? I mean, people voted for different reasons.
Because we always said we're coming out of the customs union, we're coming out of the single market. We will be in control of our borders, our laws, our money, our sovereignty. So people knew what that was. The Prime Minister has said that for the last 2 years. In Parliament, she said that for 2 years. So we all knew what it was. And obviously, there was a significant debate beforehand, and people knew what it was for. And that's what we've got to do, because it is about... how do we get, which John was talking about before, the division in the country? People are saying, look, I feel not only let down by our Parliament and our MPs who give us a referendum and defer choice to us and what we should be doing, or they defer choice upwards to another greater authority, the EU. What are our elected MPs doing? They need to be making our decisions, and with that, making domestic decisions. So we want more money for the police. We want more police on the street. 39 billion. Wouldn't that be better being spent at home as well as getting a better deal? And also a trading deficit of £100 billion with the EU that has grown over the time that we've been in the EU. No, let's strike free trade deals around the world. Okay. That now, as the EU admits, 90% of future growth is outside the EU, not inside. We are an outward-looking global nation. We've been traders with the globe. That's what we need to do.
And just finally, just to end on the leadership point, if Theresa May fails to get her deal through, if she can't get what you want her to get from Brussels, would you consider putting in a letter of no confidence?
Well, I stood down from the government because I didn't have confidence in what it was doing. So I've done that because I didn't have confidence in where it was going and what it was doing. However, if the Prime Minister goes back to the EU, like she's saying now, and gets a better deal, something she was not prepared to do when I asked her in Cabinet, if she is, then I am fully behind her if she can get a better deal.
Would you ever run for leader yourself?
At the moment, I am looking for a person who can unite the party behind a Brexit deal, a person who believes in Brexit, who's got really the full passion to deliver.
Can you see someone who's doing that?
Well, I've seen the array of people who've come forward at the moment, and I think if we can all get behind one, for me, the most important thing is not the personalities, it is the deal for our country.
So you're not ruling
to make
it out,
better.
You're not ruling out running for the leadership?
If people asked me, then of course you'd say, of course you'd give it serious concern and do it if people asked me. But at the moment, I'm looking at who's in the papers, who can we get behind? But it shouldn't be about the personality. It should be about the country and this deal.
OK. Esther McVeigh, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, after the break, we'll be joined by the chair of the Brexit Select Committee, Hilary Benn. Welcome back. Well, just days before MPs vote on the Prime Minister's plan, the Brexit Select Committee has released a highly critical report on the deal. It says the plan fails to offer sufficient clarity or certainty about the future, and Theresa May's proposals are neither detailed nor substantive. And the chair of that committee is Labour's Hilary Benn, who joins us now. So what exactly has your committee found?
Well, good morning, Sophie. We've agreed unanimously a report. Now, we are a committee made up of people who campaigned passionately for Remain and for Leave during the referendum. But, as you yourself have said, we were promised a detailed and substantive political declaration on our future relationship. We haven't got one. All it offers is uncertainty about the future. And the only thing we know for sure is the terms on which we will leave. But if you're a business looking 5 years ahead, 10 years, and you ask the question, so how's trade going to work? What will happen to services, which is 80% of the British economy? The honest answer is you don't know, because nobody knows. And we also say that the government has failed to make the choices that it will eventually have to make about how we trade off the different things that we want. Because the government's proposals put forward in Chequers were rejected by the EU. We say that Canada wouldn't work. It wouldn't solve the problem of Northern Ireland. It wouldn't ensure the continuation of friction-free trade, which is so important to the British economy. As we know, that's why there's concern about what would happen at Dover-Calais Eurotunnel if we were to leave with no deal. We also observe as a committee that we think there isn't likely to be a majority in the House of Commons for leaving with no deal, and that's something that we will test as part of the vote on amendments on Tuesday. You've been the chair of the committee for some time now. We're now on to the third Brexit Secretary. We're going to be hearing from one of the former Brexit Secretaries, Dominic Raab, a little bit later on the show. And one thing that seems to have come out from the previous Brexit secretaries is that they feel that they weren't properly listened to, weren't properly involved, shall we say, in some of those negotiations. Do you think there's been a problem in how the negotiations have been carried out? Look, I think any Prime Minister is going to want to be directing what have been the most important negotiations that the country has engaged in for decades. And, you know, the dynamic between a Prime Minister and Cabinet Ministers, as I know from my own experience, in the end, the Prime Minister is going to want to decide what is going to happen. But
so
I think there's a much more fundamental problem, which has been for 2 years, the Cabinet was riven with disagreement. It was arguing amongst itself about what even to ask for. When we would meet Michel Barnier, he would say, could you please tell us what it is you want as a country? That's the first problem. And the second problem is I don't think the government's been honest with the British people about the choices we have to make, because the other thing we say in our report today is the degree of access we're going to have in future will depend on the extent to which we are prepared to follow the rules of the people with whom we are trading. Now, that is a trade-off. That is a choice. And I'm afraid that the story of Brexit has been, for too long, the impression was given, oh, don't worry, we can get everything we want, we can get rid of the things that we don't want. And now, finally, people have realised that is not true. And if you listen to those who argued for Brexit, they don't actually have a plan. Is it Canada? Is it leaving with no deal and not paying our bills?
Well, to be fair, people who back Remain hardly have a plan either. Some of them say that we should respect the result of the referendum. Others say that they want a second referendum. Others are talking about a Norway option. Which one do you want to see? It's easy to criticise other people, isn't it, for not having...
I respected the outcome of the referendum. I voted to trigger Article 50. But it's quite clear that the deal that the Prime Minister's brought back is not going to succeed. I don't think it offers certainty. And the amendment that I put down for next Tuesday, as well as rejecting the Prime Minister's deal, also says the House of Commons rejects leaving with no deal. And I think that is really important, because the two pit props of the Prime Minister's argument have been, well, it's either my deal or it's leaving with no deal. If Parliament with one vote says, well, neither of those is acceptable, then I think it puts pressure on the government to move. My own view is that it would be more sensible to go for membership of the EEA in a customs union. But if we cannot reach agreement on that, if Parliament remains deadlocked, then in the end we're going to have to resolve this one way or another. And it is just possible that the only way that can be achieved is by going back to ask the people again. But this is a very difficult process.
Do you think there's a parliamentary majority for the EEA, this Norway Plus option, staying in the single market and a customs union?
Well, that has yet to be tested. Honest answer, Sophie, is I don't know. I don't think anybody does. There are clearly those in the government who would choose to move in that direction if and when the Prime Minister's deal is rejected. Labour's policy, of course, is to want to stay in a customs union, to have a close relationship with the single market, which is pretty close to that. But none of that is ideal, because the fundamental weakness in all of these things is you are following rules over which you have no say.
And also, in the EEA, you would also have to accept free movement of people, which is a big driver.
No, that is true. But I said in my speech in the House of Commons last week, in the end, either everyone is going to have to compromise, because nobody is going to get everything they want out of this process. The trouble is our politics has become more polarised, but there is a strong inbuilt British desire to seek compromise where it is possible. But we'll have to see whether the House of Commons would be prepared to back that.
I wanted to ask you about your amendment. You mentioned it earlier, which effectively rules out the PM's deal, it rules out no deal.
Yeah.
But I'm right in saying, aren't I, that if that amendment goes forward, people wouldn't necessarily have to vote on the Prime Minister's deal at all?
Well, if it were to be carried, then it becomes what's known as the substantive amendment, and you can have a second vote on it if you want. But if it is carried, it would say Parliament is rejecting the Prime Minister's deal. It would have... So you would be voting on the Prime Minister's deal.
So you'd be letting her off the hook a bit then, wouldn't you?
Well, no, because if Parliament votes to reject the Prime Minister's deal, it votes to reject the Prime Minister's deal. That is not letting the Prime Minister off the hook. That is telling her, I'm afraid your deal won't wash.
But at the same time, it would be significantly more difficult for the Prime Minister if you put this motion to the House, a motion she's worked on for more than 2 years, and it was decisively rejected.
Well, of course.
Wouldn't that be more difficult for her?
Well, no, I think in the end, if Parliament says, with one vote on the amendment that's got cross-party support, people from all parties, if Parliament says, we don't approve your deal, but crucially, we do not approve of leaving the European Union with no deal, I think we have an obligation.
She would not lose that vote by as many as she would lose.
That is possible.
Because a lot of people on her own backbenchers would not support your amendment.
Indeed, because some of them think you can leave with no deal. Now, I'm very clear, and if you look at the evidence, the assessments that have been done, the warnings from County Council, talk to business. Never mind what politicians say about the impact of no deal. Just talk to business, as we have done, taken evidence as a committee, I have done, and ruling out leaving with no deal now, I think is really important for the future of the country, because otherwise you prolong the uncertainty. I don't think there's a majority in the House of Commons for leaving with no deal. I don't actually think the government would be foolish enough to say, OK, we are leaving with no deal, so why carry on pretending? Let's give Parliament the chance to say, clearly, we reject your deal, we also reject no deal, and then other possibilities will open up.
So even if it saves the Prime Minister from a far heavier defeat, you're not going to be withdrawing your amendment?
No, I think Parliament should be given the chance to reject no deal, because I think a cross-party amendment has a chance. It may be that all of the amendments go down and the Prime Minister's deal is also defeated. One cannot predict what the House of Commons will decide. We are a democracy.
Well, that is certainly true, if recent weeks are anything to go by. Hilary Benn, thank you very much. Coming up after the break, the Brexit Minister, Kwasi Kwarteng.
Hi, I'm Hannah Stott with the latest showbiz news. A warning, some flash photography is coming up. Kevin Hart says he's stepped down as Oscars host following an outcry over previous anti-gay tweets by the comedian. Hart posted on Twitter an apology to the LGBTQ community for his past words. He said he stepped down so as not to be a distraction on a night that should be celebrated by so many amazing, talented artists.
Hey guys.
You're 15 weeks now.
Is she moving?
Yeah.
YouTube has released its annual Rewind list, ranking the top 10 videos that it says caught the attention of people all over the world. The #1 video on that list is Kylie Jenner's 11-minute To Our Daughter video that was released after giving birth to her daughter Stormy with boyfriend Travis Scott.
So, yeah, every year we put together this list of the top trending videos. These are videos that have a lot of views, but it's not just the most viewed videos. They're the videos that people were talking about, they were making their own versions of, they were searching for them, they were liking them, they were commenting on them. We incorporate all of that to figure out which were the top trending videos of the year. And the list this year kind of runs the gamut, I suppose, but it is very sort of driven by a lot of different creators who have built these huge audiences online.
when you're 20 years old, you're just figuring out your life. You don't know what you want. You're an indecisive teenager and you're just becoming a young adult. And there was one thing that your mom knew for sure, and that was you.
After an outcry from fans, Netflix has announced that it's keeping Friends on its platform at a reported $100 million price tag to the streaming service. Jennifer Aniston says it's amazing that Friends still has an audience big enough to prompt multi-million-dollar business deals.
I do find it to be, I find it amazing that it's continued to have such love and such an audience and such an appetite for it. I think it says a lot about the show, and especially since it takes place at a time where it's so different from now. You know, people actually spoke to each other and hung out with each other and talked.
Welcome back. Well, we've had a lot of criticism of the Prime Minister's plan so far this morning, so it's time now to hear the defence. Joining us is the Brexit Minister, Kwasi Kwarteng. Thank you for being on the show. Now, to start off with, there's a lot of stories in the newspapers this morning about the possibility of the vote being delayed. Is that going to happen?
My understanding is that we'll have a vote on Tuesday and we are looking to win that vote. I mean, there's a lot of speculation, lots of people saying lots of different things, but we won't actually know until the day itself, and I look forward to concluding the debate and seeing what happens.
You say you're looking to win the vote.
Absolutely.
Can you really look me in the eye and say that you think that there's a possibility that you might actually win the vote?
Look, in the House of Commons votes, anything can happen. And I think that we've got a good shot of winning.
A good shot of winning?
Yeah, I think so, because the argument is a strong argument. I think the deal is a strong deal. I wouldn't have taken up my post if I didn't believe that the deal delivers the Brexit vote. Now, we heard Hilary Benn. We heard him talk about business. We heard him talk about uncertainty. And that's exactly what passing the withdrawal agreement, the final vote, will do. It'll deliver certainty. I was in my constituency on Friday talking to business people, small businesses, and they said to me, we need to get the vote done. We need certainty. And they actually looked at me and said, why are you politicians playing silly games? That was the phrase they used. About the future of this country.
So if we're talking about providing certainty then, what is the plan B? Because you must have a plan B. Any responsible government would have a plan B.
Well, as I said, we've got to try and win the vote. I'm not going to speculate as to what happens should the deal or the final vote be voted down. I think that would create a lot more uncertainty. I think it would create chaos is a word that's been described. I think Tony Benn himself, not Tony Benn, as a Freudian slip, Hilary Benn, himself said on your show that uncertainty was exactly what business didn't want. And I think the way to end that uncertainty is to vote for the deal on Tuesday.
At the same time, though, we've seen around 100 Conservative MPs express their issues with the deal. The DUP say they'll vote against, the SNP, Labour, the Lib Dems. The government became the first government to lose a motion finding it in contempt of Parliament. I mean, these are extraordinary times. What does Theresa May need to do to turn it around and to rescue the negotiation?
You're right. These are extraordinary times. I think lots of people are under a lot of stress. There are difficult issues. But I would like to put it in context. We were in the EEC and the EU for 45 years. It took us about 10 years to get in the first place, and we're coming out. And what the deal does, what the agreement does, is actually manage that process in an orderly and smooth way. It's a difficult thing to do. No country has done that. And the deal on offer, the withdrawal agreement, is a very good way to manage that exit. Now, I understand why people who want to stay in the EU want to tear it down. I'm slightly more confused by Brexiteers like I was. I campaigned very vigorously for Brexit. I'm very surprised that people on our side of the argument are, when we have 3 months and 3 weeks left to our formal exit, are willing to blow up a deal which actually offers a very good path out of the EU.
Well, let's talk about one of those people, shall we? Boris Johnson's written in the Sun on Sunday today. He says when he talks to his friends and colleagues about why they might vote for the deal, they offer a groan of despair and only give one reason, which is because they believe there's no alternative. We've run out of time and run out of road. I mean, you're someone who's relatively close to Boris Johnson. Well, are you talking about you there?
No, not at all. I mean, I took up my post a few weeks ago. I've spent all my time, almost all my waking hours, on the withdrawal agreement. And I said to Boris, the more I read the agreement, the more I liked it. The more I actually got into the weeds of it, because I think it delivers on not 3, but 4 things. It delivers on freedom of movement. We get to have our own immigration policy. We stop the annual subscription to the EU club, if you like, after the initial payments. We have our own independent trade policy. The CJU ends its jurisdiction over Britain. And it's a strong deal from that point
But there
of
are
view.
some issues as well, aren't there? You can see why people have concerns about being trapped in the backstop, for example.
Yeah, I absolutely see why people are concerned about the backstop, because the backstop is not an ideal situation. Having said that, the backstop is a contingency. So if we haven't negotiated a free trade agreement, then the backstop kicks in. I'm confident that we can organise and sign a free trade agreement with the EU. People say, well, it took them 7 years to do a deal with Canada or Korea or whoever it was. But the difference was that those were third parties. We've been in the EU for 46 years, or we will have been in it for 46 years, so it should be very relatively straightforward to conclude a free trade arrangement in much less time than would be the case in two third-party countries.
We'll be talking to Dominic Raab, or hearing the interview that I did earlier with Dominic Raab a little bit later in the show, the former Brexit Secretary, and he said that there actually was room to negotiate a better deal when it comes to the backstop, that it could have been just a temporary arrangement.
Well, I wasn't privy to those discussions, and of course he has his own reasons for why he left government and why he felt that the negotiations were unsatisfactory. But to Dominic and to other Brexiteer colleagues, I would say that we have 3 months and less than 3 weeks before we have the formal exit day. If the deal goes through, we have a plan with which we can leave the EU. And that's what many of my constituents are saying. They said, we voted to leave, and this is a plan that actually delivers that.
So you think that if it doesn't go through, we might not leave the EU?
Well,
you think Parliament will block it?
Clearly people think that, because Tony Blair was in the studios last week saying that we should have a second referendum. And the reason why he wants a second referendum is because he wants to stay in the EU. And you just have to look at things like betting markets, for example. They're saying that the chances of a second referendum are increasing because of the uncertainty. So I really implore Brexiteer colleagues to think about what they're doing. You know, they will consult their constituencies and their own consciences. But really, I think more uncertainty, more confusion is simply could well frustrate the very end that they want.
I mean, the problem that you have is that it doesn't seem like there is a majority for this deal in the House of Commons. If the Norway Plus option, something that your cabinet colleague Amber Rudd has suggested as a plausible solution, staying within the single market and a customs union, accepting free movement of people, is that something that you could stomach?
Speaking personally, would not want the Norway Plus, or whatever it's called, the Norway arrangement, because it simply doesn't allow us to have our own immigration policy. And clearly freedom of movement, free movement of people was a big issue in the referendum campaign, which I supported, where I supported the Leave campaign. So I don't think Norway Plus, or whatever you would like to call it, actually delivers on that.
So would you resign if that was the government's policy then?
Well, let's just wait and see. I think that we have to win the vote on Tuesday, and then after that, we can see where we are.
Another potential plan B that people are talking about is a kind of managed no deal. As a kind of Brexiteer yourself, are you worried about what no deal would look like?
You mentioned a managed no deal. I want a managed deal, and that to me is a better outcome than a managed no deal. I think no deal is, again, adding to uncertainty. It's adding to an air of chaos. And what business people, and it's not just business people, it's actually people who work in small businesses, are concerned about is having some degree of certainty. They see it as a soap opera, really, a lot of what's going on, and they want the soap opera to end and they want to get on with their lives.
OK. Kwasi Kwarteng, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Well, you are watching a special extended Sophie Ridge on Sunday, so do stay tuned, because in the next hour we'll be trying to provide more Brexit clarity with our guests. Hopefully you're feeling a little bit more clear so far. I'm not sure if I can promise too much, but I guess next hour includes the former Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab and also the DUP's leader in Westminster, Nigel Dodds. So please do stay with us.